Imagine standing in the line at the airport, waiting to check in for your flight. You still need to go through security. The line is moving ridiculously slow, so you must be flying out of Philadelphia. And everyone is growing impatient. At the back of the line, there's a gentleman who's on his phone. He's taken 3 phone calls at this point. He's checked his watch 5 times, and he's become impatient. Eventually, he decides he's had enough. He grabs his bag, he walks past everybody else in line and rushes straight to the front. The gate agent politely tells him, "Sir, you need to return to the back of the line." The man becomes even more angry, and using a loud voice, he looks at the agent and says, "Do you know who I am?" The agent calmly replies, "No, sir, but you're going to have to wait your turn." The man again, louder this time, says, "Do you know who I am?" The agent calmly says, "No, sir, but you have to return to the back of the line." A third time, the man, now irate, demands that the agent help him and says, "Do you know who I am? Help me now." Finally, the agent picks up the intercom and says, "Attention, everyone. We have a man here at counter 7 who doesn't know who he is. If anyone can help him, please come to counter 7 immediately." The story is funny, but beneath the humor is actually a powerful question. Who am I? In Matthew 16, we meet Jesus and his disciples at a significant turning point in their journey. They've traveled north to Caesarea Philippi, a place surrounded by competing claims of religious and political power. And in that setting, Jesus chooses to ask his disciples the question, who do people say that the Son of Man is? Now that's an easy question, honestly, for the disciples and us, because all we have to do is repeat what we've heard. Who do other people say that you are? What have I heard other people say? All I really have to do in this moment is tell Jesus what everybody else has already said. Some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, some say Jeremiah, or even one of the other prophets. That's an external question. Who do people say that you are? But in true Jesus fashion, the test gets a little bit harder. Jesus turns the question toward the disciples, but who do you say that I am? Now that's a much harder question to answer. Now it's personal. He's asking them, do you know who I am? Because it's one thing to repeat what somebody else believes. It's another thing to put our own beliefs out into the atmosphere. It's one thing to say the crowd says. It's quite another to say, I say. And maybe what makes this question so important is that it really doesn't matter how strangers see you. It doesn't really matter how strangers or who strangers would say you are. What matters to us is how the people close to us define us. Who do my friends say that I am? Who do my followers say do I am? Who do the people who I spend the most time with say that I am? Who do my friends and my family claim me to be? Jesus says, disciples, do you know who I am? And Peter answers for the group and says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And then something remarkable happens. Notice this movement in the text. Peter speaks to the identity of Jesus, and Jesus immediately speaks to Peter about his identity. Jesus begins to tell Peter who he is because identity shapes everything that comes after it. You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. What we believe shapes how we live. It shapes what we value. It shapes what we pursue, what we're willing to carry, and sometimes what we are willing to give up. Romans reminds us that our identity is not stagnant. We are constantly being transformed constantly becoming. We learn more about God, and by learning more about God, we learn more about ourselves. We learn more about ourselves not through the patterns of the world, but through the renewing of our minds. Peter understands who Jesus is, and then Jesus tells Peter who he is, the rock. A rock is important, not because it's flashy. A rock is important because it is stable. Rocks can carry weights. Rocks endure pressure. Rocks provide stable ground when everything else is shifting. Rocks give you something to stand on when life is difficult. Rocks are used to lay foundation because they can be trusted to hold something. Jesus looks at Peter and calls him the rock and is in essence saying, Peter, you are someone I can build with. Your faith is something I can build on. But here's what I love about Peter being called the rock, is that Jesus calls Peter a rock before Peter becomes stable enough to look like one. Jesus looks at Peter, a man who will get it right in one moment and get it wrong in the next. He looks at Peter, not because Peter is perfect, not because Peter will never fail, not because Peter will always understand, but because Peter was confident enough to confess some of what he believed. That is something that God can build on. You will still misunderstand, and Peter will still misunderstand. We will speak impulsively. Peter even tries to stop Jesus from going to the cross, and even eventually denies him. Yet Jesus calls him the rock anyway. That is good news for us, because it means we don't have to have it all figured out in order for there to be purpose in our lives. It means that we don't have to have it all in perfect order to be a part of what God is building. We just have to have enough faith for God to build on. Jesus saw the rock in Peter before Peter could consistently see it in himself. And that is what the church is called to be a place where imperfect people belong. A place where people are not valued only for what they have already become, but where people can see what God is still forming them to be. You may not have it all worked out, but God can take where you are and build from there. On that rock, I can build my reign. Each one of us has the opportunity to hear what Jesus teaches, to decide who Jesus is, and then to become a part of the foundation that God is building, to become a part of what God is using in order to make sure God's reign happens here and not just later. But Jesus doesn't just stop in this moment after calling Peter the rock. He keeps going. He doesn't stop with the foundation, but he continues and says, I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Do you remember the first time somebody handed you the keys to a car? Not just to unlock the door, and trust me, I just saying keys to the car, I was scared to give him my keys. But somebody handed you the keys to a car with the expectation that you were going to be the one to drive. There was excitement in you in that moment. Keys to a car represented a level of freedom that many of us couldn't wait to get the moment we turned 16. And some of us drove illegally on our parents' property before 16. But you put that key in the ignition, you turn it and you hear the engine come to life. Those keys gave you access, not just to a car, but in many ways, they gave you freedom to travel further, to travel faster. They gave you access to experiences that were further than your legs could carry you. The keys to a car gave you access to things that previously were out of reach for you. I remember the first time I had the keys to my mother's car, and I was only supposed to be going from one area of Philadelphia to another area of Philadelphia. But once I had the keys in my hand and I was no longer in front of my mother, I could go wherever I wanted to, as long as I put enough gas in the car before I came back. She didn't know how far I'd driven. I went all the way to New York that day. And just remembered to put just enough gas in so it looked like I just went the 20 minutes away that I was supposed to be going, because keys give us a freedom and an access to things that we might not otherwise have. That's the thing about keys. They're not just keys, they are access. A key can get you through a door. A key can open something that has been closed. A key can give you entry where others cannot enter. Jesus establishes that Peter has a strong foundation by calling him the rock, and then he gives him keys, which means Peter now has access to some things. Crazy thing about those keys, though, is that yes, they provide access, but they also restrict access. Jesus says, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Because the same key that can open a door and give access to things is the same key that locks spaces and prevents access. In other words, what you do with your access matters. What you do with keys matters. Jesus is not handing Peter keys so that he can stand at the door of the kingdom like a bouncer at a club, deciding who gets special treatment and who's allowed in and who gets turned away. Jesus is entrusting Peter and the community that will follow us with something sacred: the ability to create the love of God and to bind and lock out the ways that go against the love of God. The power to bind and loose reminds us that what we do on this earth matters. How we use our access matters. The doors we open matter. The burdens we place on people, the things we hold tightly, the things we release, it all matters. So perhaps the question for the church is not simply, do we have the keys? The question is, what are we doing with them? Are we using our keys to create more barriers in the forms of traditions and rules? Or are we looking for ways to make access to God easier? Are we binding people with shame and expectations that Jesus never asked them to carry? Or are we loosing people from burdens that have kept them from experiencing the fullness of God's love? Because the same keys that can lock someone out can also welcome someone in. That is the responsibility that Jesus has placed in the church by giving us those keys, not to stand at the door and say, "Do you know who I am?" but to stand in the world, knowing who Jesus is and to create access to all that he teaches. To stand in the world knowing who Jesus is and being committed to the love and the way that Jesus loves. Jesus gives us keys and in effect says, go and create access. Go and build community. Go and hold back the things that do not align with my love. Go and open doors that religion and society have closed. Because access is not a privilege to be protected. Access is a responsibility to steward. To ask the question, who are we opening the door for? And perhaps the more uncomfortable question, who have we unintentionally and sometimes intentionally kept out? But there's one more part to this journey. Jesus calls Peter the rock. Then Jesus gives Peter the keys and tells him to do the work of releasing and binding. But if we stop there, we may misunderstand exactly how to use our keys to create access. Yes, keys can be used for power. Keys can be used to decide who gets in and who stays out. Keys can be used to protect what belongs to us. They make us feel important. If you've got a key to the front door, then you know exactly how great it is to just walk in without needing somebody else here. But Jesus began to talk to the disciples about the cross. And perhaps the cross is what teaches us how to use keys, how to bind and what to loose. Because the cross says that access is not about getting more for yourself. Access is about asking, how can what I have been given make room for somebody else? Jesus had access, he had power, he had authority, and yet he did not use it to protect himself. He used it to heal. He used his power and his access to welcome. He used it to serve. And ultimately, he used it to give life. That is the way of the cross. The cross teaches us that Jesus' way is not one of power and control, it is of love. The greatest use of access is not privilege, it is service. The greatest question is not what can I do because I have keys, it's who can I help because I have keys. Because of all of us have some form of access. In Romans, Paul says that we all have gifts. We all come together to form one body. We all have something that we are good at. Some of us have access to rooms that other people cannot enter. Some of us have a voice that people listen to. We have influence. Some of us have resources. Some of us have relationships. Some of us have the ability to open a door that others cannot. And the way of the cross asks us, what are you willing to give up so that somebody else can get in? Are you willing to give up your comfort? Are you willing to give up your control? Are you willing to give up privileges and having things your way? Are you willing to move over and make room? Because sacrificial love means that sometimes using your access, your gifts, your skills for somebody else is going to cost you something. But that is what Jesus did. He went to the cross and in effect says, because of who I am, there is room for you. So the rock tells us what we stand on. And the keys remind us that what we have been entrusted with matters. And the cross teaches us exactly what to do with the access we have been given, with the gifts, the skills, and the talents that we each have. Stand on the rock. Use keys to create access. And follow the way of the cross even when opening that door or giving access is going to cost you something. Amen. I invite you into this time of prayer as we each sit and quietly pray the concerns that are on our hearts, the things that our mind carries. And if you are comfortable, if there are things that you would like to call aloud, things that you would like us all to be praying for with you, I invite you to do so now. Creator God, you are indeed with us in this moment. And you know the true desires of our hearts, the burdens that we carry, the things that grieve us, the things that bring us joy, the things that we ourselves are afraid to admit. We ask now that you would speak to those things, that you would let us know that even in those moments that you are with us, that in those moments, even as we are carrying heavy things, when they are not removed, you give us the strength to carry them. We ask that you would allow your Spirit to reign in this space and in this world. We ask that you would help us to do what is right with the access, with the gifts, the skills, the talents that you have given us, so that other people might see us and gain access to your love. So that by the using of the gifts, the skills, and the talents you have given us, someone in this world might find joy. Someone might find peace. Someone might be reminded that they are seen, they are valued, and they are loved. We thank you for the things that you have done, and we ask that you would give us a willingness to challenge the things that are wrong in our world, even when we know it may cost us something. That we would make room for each other in this space and in all spaces. That we would train our ears for the still small voice of someone that might be crying out for our help. And as we come together now praying this prayer that you taught your disciples, we say these words: Our Father and Mother, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.